Alrighty, hi there everybody. It's Brett Vitkin again, coming to you with my second video discussing Vipassana meditation. And today I'm going to specifically be talking about why we should practice. I think there are a plethora of answers as to, the benefits of practice, what make practice, what it adds to our lives. But I really want to take some time today to provide you my best perspective, which is the clinical perspective of what Vipassana meditation can really bring to us and some of the benefits therein. So the first thing I want to share is this graph, specifically looking at journal publications that have the word mindfulness or related to mindfulness research over the past about 30 years. And I always like to highlight this because sometimes I get people who critique mindfulness practice as a somewhat of a pseudoscience, where we don't understand what's going on, and there is some merit to that. We're still learning, we're still comprehending and exploring how meditation and the brain interact and how meditation and psychology interact. But I do think this is just such a fascinating trend within medical science and within psychological research, in that mindfulness is really blown up as a topic. And Vipassana carries a lot of the weight here, Vipassana practices, I should say. And so I just think it's really interesting, and I think it's cool for those of you who do have a scientific interest in mindfulness, that there's a plethora of research out there, and a lot of what I'm talking about is based in substantial science. And so one of the most pivotal studies that I think captures what meditation can really do for us, if we were to extrapolate it out onto a lifetime of practice, is this paper by Brewer and his associates in 2011, who looked at meditators, people who endorsed meditating for 10,000 or more hours, and they put them through three different conditions, three different meditations. And one of those meditations was a Vipassana meditation. And so what they did was they put them in an MRI machine, and they scanned their brains at just baseline, just sitting, not really being active in anything, and then ran them through these three conditions. They did the same thing with non-practitioners, or what they call naive practitioners, people with not a lot of experience. And they did the same thing. They took them in just a normal state, not really active, and then ran them through these three meditations. And then they compared, what are these brain scans telling us between meditators and non-meditators? And I think first and foremost, it's great to see that people who did subscribe to long-term meditation did report less mind wandering. So they felt they had more focus while in the scan. And we also see that this was supported by this finding related to the default mode network. So we saw decreased activation in long-term meditators in this network. And what this network is responsible for is self-referential thinking. Really, we believe it's kind of the center where that mind-wandering part of the brain is. So will I have to do this today? Did I leave the stove on? Did I finish this presentation? Did I submit it properly? All of those things are this part of the brain. And what we see is a decreased activation in it. And then importantly as well, we see increased connectivity between the default mode network and areas responsible for emotional regulation, such as the anterior cingulate cortex, and decision-making and abstract thought, like dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And I know I'm throwing a lot of terminology out there, but I want to emphasize that a lot of the benefits that people report with meditation, I feel like I have more control over myself. I feel like I have better attention. I feel like my mind doesn't wander as much. We can say that, and we can report that subjective experience, but what Brewer's study really did was, from our understanding, take that expression and tie it into neurological foundations, and shows that there are neurological differences between these groups. And so to look at that, again, when we see red, we see high activation. When we see blue, we see low activation. I want you all to pay attention to this far right category here. And so when they kind of overlay them and they look at what activation looks like, we see down here, we see a lower activation in this area associated with the default mode network. We see higher activation and baseline in these areas associated with higher level cognition. And then interestingly, when we do go into a meditative practice, these areas of abstract thought, or I shouldn't say of complex thought, become less activated. And so people become more tuned to their experience. We're thinking less. And I just really appreciate how this study provided the neurological basis for how that happens, or really if there is any neurological change. And I think that's what Brewer's study captures really well. And so some of you might be thinking, okay, Brett, sure, there's people at 10,000 hours. How many hours a day would you have to meditate over X amount of years to reach 10,000 hours? And I concede, I hear you. That is a great criticism, which is why I wanted to bring this study up as well. So Gottnick did a meta-analytical review of 28 studies that incorporated Vipassana meditation in a program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And I may talk about MBSR in a later model, but really it's the first and foremost mindfulness-based program that's been implemented into medical settings. It was founded by John Kabat-Zinn. He's an amazing person. I could suggest if you're interested to look him up. But a core component of these MBSR retreats is Vipassana meditation. And so what they did, they looked at 28 studies over 20 years that integrated this 8-week intensive retreat program for individuals who are struggling with a multitude of issues, from depression to chronic pain, anxiety, people who are just looking to enhance their life. And then what they did was they looked again at, so they took the neurological data, MRI scans and fMRI scans from these studies and compared them and did overlays. And what we found was we saw increased activation in the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. So again, those areas, one responsible for abstract thought and two responsible for retrieving memories, the hippocampus, and encoding memories so people can remember things better, they can think through things better. We have decreased activation in the amygdala and decreased activation in the cingulate cortex. So these are some of the more emotional areas. Now, again, up and down is a little simplistic, but I think for the nature of this presentation, what this highlights again is decreased emotional reactivity and increased cognitive ability to process our surroundings. And so I also kind of just want to highlight that Vipassana isn't just used to help us with psychological problems, or we can see how maybe, yes, having better control of our emotional world, our emotional reactions can help us with things like depression or anxiety. But what we also see is reductions in pain. Interestingly enough, MBSR, its first implementation in a medical setting was for chronic pain. So it helped people reorient how they were responding to those painful stimuli. And we actually saw a marked decrease in reported pain, marked decrease in use of analgesics and painkillers, and we saw a markedly increased report of life satisfaction and well-being for those who went through this. So not only does it help with psychological concerns, it can also help with medical and biological issues as well, such as chronic pain. And then lastly, I thought it was interesting is in this study by Marlatt, is that they actually showed mindfulness can be used to help with those struggling with impulse disorders such as substance use. And I think at a mechanical level, which I'll talk about in one of my next videos, it makes sense as to why mindfulness and Vipassana practice help us fight those impulses. Kind of gives us more of a mental resiliency against the behaviors and knee-jerk reactions that may be pulling us in directions that we don't want to go. So I wanted to highlight this Vipassana at the clinic, for lack of a better term, to show you that it is it's very diverse. It has a lot of applications and has a lot of effective applications that go beyond just helping us with maybe our racing thoughts or our negative thoughts, that it is a robust mechanism that can be used effectively in a medical system and in a personal system and within a psychological system. And looking at our field, so we have mindfulness-based stress reduction, we have mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, we have acceptance and commitment therapy, which a cornerstone of that is this notion of self as context. We have dialectical behavioral therapy, which one of the first real things we work on is mindfulness, working through and processing what our emotions are. We have mindfulness-based eating treatment, so using mindfulness-based practices to help those with eating disorders. And then there's many, many more that have now really blossomed under this umbrella of mindfulness-based practices, and it really all roots back down to Vipassana practice. Kind of what I touched on in the last series, one of the reasons that the Buddha maybe preach isn't the right word, the Buddha supported the practice of Vipassana is because it is applicable to many people. It's a very basic introduction, but very, very beneficial practice towards helping us with the multitude of issues that many of us experience. And so really, I want to end with this quote from John Kabat-Zinn, which is that mindfulness can only be understood from the inside out. It is not one more cognitive behavioral technique to be deployed in the behavior change paradigm, but a way of being and a way of seeing that's profound implications for understanding the nature of our own mind and bodies and for living a life that really matters. And I'm going to talk on my next one as to what this means to live the mindful experience, because I can sit up here and I can wag my finger and I can point to pretty charts and I can cite all the research in the world, but that doesn't gear you up for what mindfulness is really targeting, what the real message of mindfulness is. But I do think from our Western centric standpoint, it's important to know that we have a science behind this. And then in my next video, I'm going to take some time to explore, okay, what does it actually look like? What does this practice really mean? And how can it at a truly granular level influence you and help you live a happy and meaningful life? So I look forward to having that conversation with you all. Thank you again for your attention and wishing you a blessed and happy day.